It's my great pleasure to have with me today one of the leaders of the thought leaders in the space, the head of the Chainlink operation, Sergey Nazarov. Welcome on board, Sergey.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Emin. Thank you for having me at your conference. Good to see you as always.
Yeah, it's always fun to chat with you. It's customary to start these things with the origin story. So for people who are new to the space, people who might not know us, maybe we should start by just talking about how we got into the space. Especially you, I think, have an interesting story because you picked on a very interesting problem at a time when I think it was underappreciated. This whole issue of how to connect blockchains to the real world. Do you want to explain how that happened?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I got into this space in 2011, actually through mining, because that's all that you could do. I found out through mining through actually my interest in gaming, because back then people would mine on GPUs, right? And there was a gaming community that mined on GPUs. And so I heard about Bitcoin from there, but I actually was very interested and knew a decent amount about the history of digital currencies that were centrally run. And I eventually started to understand that Bitcoin wasn't some kind of gaming thing. It was a very different kind of digital approach to digital currency that didn't depend on an entity existing, and it was tamper-proof, and it was completely different from what had come before. And so I really started out mining. I think in reality, I've just had a lot of time to think through a lot of these things, and I've found the problems here to be quite important. And so that I literally, can wake up, think about this stuff. At the end of the day, I'm still thinking about this stuff. It's just a fascinating thing for me. And I've just had a lot of time to really reason through it together, with smart people like you and Ari and other smart people that I see through, I'm very lucky to be part of a great community where there's a lot of smart people to talk to, right? I think the way that we then arrived at the Oracle problem as being important is really through building. So there's like this, the 10-year overnight success type of thing. Not to say that we're a complete success or anything like that, but just to say that it's really through the method of trial and error where you arrive at some patterns. And so you don't want to ignore the patterns. So I think you need to do trial and error, and then you need to see the patterns, and you need to do both, right? You need to have the conviction to do things enough, and you need to have the ability to see the necessary patterns as you do those things. And so the pattern that we saw as we started building some of the first smart contracts, like this was before Ethereum, before a number of various other chains. This was back when there was like Namecoin and like a few other chains, but they what were then called app coins. And I think we were really some of the first people to build smart contracts on some of these platforms, sometimes combining multiple chains to generate the smart contract result we wanted, right? And one of the things that we basically realized was that you had a number of people that were securing what's now called the base layer and the layer one, but was then just kind of the blockchain. And now the blockchain layer was getting secured, and there were a lot of people working on that. And then you had a lot more people coming in and innovating in terms of the smart contract language side of it. And the piece of this that we always found interesting was, how do you connect all of this technology back to real world use cases? Not to say that tokens aren't real world, they are very real world, but I mean, how do you build something for the shipping industry, the insurance industry, the more advanced financial products that we know exist? And those are the things we were literally building with banks and insurance companies for years. And this very simple and obvious pattern was, you need secure connectivity, otherwise the whole security guarantee of the entire setup just fails. And we kind of just initially built it for ourselves, and then we expanded it in the way that we knew people would want. And now we've arrived at a solution that we know people want, because it's built by us, by smart contract developers, longtime smart contract developers, to meet the requirements of smart contract developers that will then also have large amounts of value, right? So it's both in solving the initial problem, and it's in making sure that that solution can scale as the value secured by such a system grows. Mm-hmm. And so those are kind of the two separate parts of the challenge there. But yeah, I think it was basically just hitting our head up against building smart contracts for many years, and then deciding that this is a piece of infrastructure that absolutely has to exist for smart contracts to evolve into into the categories of contracts we're interested in.
That's really interesting. You said something there that I want to revisit later on, which is capturing the value at the higher levels down below in the system itself, or coupling those two together more tightly. I want to follow up on that later on. Just as a background though, how did you end up finding Ari Jules? How did you end up connecting with IC3? Where did the drive to intersect and work closely with academics come from? Because often what you see in this space is people just going at it alone. They just go by gut feel. You know, these algorithms are mostly untested. People test in production. So you have a very different take on this. Where did that come from?
You know, really, I think the people in our society that provide some of the most value are academics. And, you know, like people get excited by a sports star or a movie star or somebody like that. I get really excited when I meet one of these people who saw some paper that I've read somewhere. And, you know, there's this service SSRN where you can see a lot of the authors and you can read a lot of different papers and stuff, right? And so I've always been really, really impressed by people like you and Ari and just the amazing things that you come up with in such formulaic, clear ways. And I think there's quotes along this, right? Like society will change for the better when people idealize scientists and stuff like that. Maybe it has something to do with Russia. In Russia, you know, in certain circles, so engineers are very revered, right? They're the people that built like Sputnik and satellites and stuff like that, right? And basically, I think that's where it comes from. I think it also comes from two other quick things. There's a historical context here that's important, is that our space came out of white papers, right? Yes. And our space came out of research. Yeah. And it didn't come out of people, you know, building fast and breaking things and like hoping for the best and let's cross our fingers, maybe it'll be okay, right? That's a good model when you have enough security at the infrastructure level to allow you to do that. But that's not necessarily the way to build the infrastructure that has to create that security. And so I think that the thing that I've always appreciated about our space is that it's really generated like at the infrastructure level, which is where we kind of sit and focus on doing what needs to be done. We see that it's about rigorous thinking. It's not about somebody taking themselves from a web developer and repurposing them into somebody who can, you know, roll their own crypto and like cross their fingers and say it's going to be okay, right? This is not the way, right, to make infrastructure. Hopefully, we as people who make infrastructure can get the space to a place where people can very rapidly do that and not have security concerns. Right. And so I think that's the big distinction, is that people come from a startup culture where they're like, hey, you know, I made a casual game and now I'm going to make blockchain infrastructure. I'm rolling my own crypto. It's going to be fine. Mm-hmm. And once again, because I've been doing this for a number of years, I've just seen that's not fine, right? That's not a good idea. And yeah, so I think it's partly historical context and it's partly this, I see this big difference between making infrastructure and like quickly iterating to make an application. And there's just a different set of approaches that work for those. Like it isn't always like that approach of let's make the application comes from a world where the infrastructure allows you to remain secure and productive.
Right. So yeah, that's actually one of my pet peeves. And it's something where I actually look to cryptographers in awe. They ended up teaching the world that you shouldn't roll your own crypto. Like the moment you say that, every listener knows that anybody who rolled their own crypto is probably a crank, most likely has a bug, probably has 10. And so that's great. But somehow it's okay to roll your own database. Somehow it's okay to roll your own consensus protocol. I think that tells us that we're still early on in this game, that these other areas haven't reached the same level of specialist knowledge that cryptography has. So it's interesting. In any case, just sort of rolling back a little bit and going back to the origins, I think your path is kind of similar to mine. I think we all started from this base of sort of foundational knowledge. What are the basics of this area? What are the core requirements? So mine ended up coming from a very different direction. Obviously, I was a professor at Cornell, and I was looking at peer-to-peer systems. And there we have this problem of leechers, people who end up not contributing resources to the system. And the big problem there is, well, how do you motivate these people to actually contribute? How do you do this at society at large? Well, my idea, which at the time turned out to be prescient, was why don't we come up with a monetary system? Magic internet coins that you can't just manufacture out of the sky, that you need to download a file, and you get them by uploading files. So it's kind of a nice economic system. And I built a system called Karma. I believe it's the first built system with proof of work mining in it from 2002, published in '03. And so that was a while before Bitcoin. And it was interesting, actually. We've come a long way. I was counseled, believe it or not, by my mentors, older professors. They came to me and said, look, this is cool stuff. It's interesting. It's maybe got a future, maybe not. But for sure, there is no funding in it. So it was really funny. You'll never be able to make a name for yourself if you can't get funding. Well, name for yourself as an assistant professor. If you cannot get funding, and at the time, if you think about the date, 2002, it was right after 9/11.
Yeah,
and it was hard. It was really hard. So we've come a long way since then. And now look at us. We're now in DeFi land, and funding is all in crypto and not in any of these other areas.
It's not even that. I think just really quickly, just to mention on one of your points, like this is one of the reasons I actually didn't pursue a PhD and didn't pursue some of these other things. It's kind of because I think there's academic folks that realize this also, that there's academics that seek to work the kind of academic system, and they seek to generate papers and citations.
Oh yes.
And that's their and you give people a metric, right? And they'll optimize that metric, right? And they'll build their time and their energy around it. And I think that there are other academic folks that only care about the impact that all this stuff is going to have, and that's going to happen through adoption and all those things. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't have exactly the same discussion you had, because I was never an assistant professor or anything like this. But I saw that the incentives in this academic world were not necessarily aligned with generating outcomes. Yeah. They were aligned with generating papers and citations and making these little incremental improvements that can get you a quick kind of a win, instead of spending 10 years baking something and then having it rejected from 3 I can't. There's a massive parallel, actually, right? Like all the people that submit amazing, innovative things to conferences, right? There's all this stuff, right? It just got rejected 3 times because the guy, they never heard of this approach before. And so they don't even put it in the conference. And so I think that, yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying. I think that some people, there's not everybody in academia that always takes the view, like we have to create an outcome, right? They're thinking like my career, my papers, but very luckily, like me and you, we get to, be surrounded by people that are more about the outcomes, which is something I'm always, like when people that smart begin focusing on outcomes, you're going to get some amazing outcomes is basically what I've seen.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You see this thing called slicing the salami in academics, where you have a big idea, but you don't publish it all at once. You come up with small, tiny variants. These distributed system protocols come out. There are hundreds of papers, each with slight variations and tiny modifications. And, maybe cumulatively they have some impact, but this really ought to be a game of actually changing the world and not about getting papers out. Well, let's fast forward, so let's look around today. It's the land of DeFi. So what's your take on what's happening in crypto today?
Right. Sorry. So, I mean, I guess the question is, when you look around DeFi today, what's missing? What key issues aren't being technically addressed? That type of thing, right? Yeah. And I think on the technical issue side of like, what are the key issues not being addressed? I guess I can throw those to you and then comment as well. So, like, what do you think are the key technical issues not being solved right now?
Yeah, good question, actually. So, it's been, 10, 11 years since Satoshi came out, right? And so the blockchain space has really established its footing. It's here. It's not going anywhere. It is, sure, at any one time, there are many different things coming and going. Some of them are more legitimate than others, but the space overall has established itself as a different asset class. Mm-hmm. And these latest happenings with DeFi especially are really exciting. What I see there is I don't know if you share this view. It's a giant pot of experimentation, and there are these weird things that people are throwing into the mix, and some of which play nicely with others, some don't, and some are dead ends, some are crazy, some are really out there. But in total, there's a lot of great experimentation happening that will fundamentally change the way we do finance. Finance today is a game of audits. It's a game of people coming after the fact and seeing if a trusted entity actually did its job properly. And more often than not, there's something weird going on. And we've seen like basic inability to account for shares in finance. We've seen outright malfeasance in finance. This happens all the time, and it's very costly to unwind, very costly to stem these problems. And adding more regulation simply reduces the rate of innovation. It makes it hard for other people to come in. And that's one of the other reasons why I was attracted to this space. It's because we can transform the way it's done. We can build systems that are correct by construction. But there are some challenges, and let's talk maybe, if you will, about what you see as challenges as well. But from my perspective, I think the biggest challenge is scalability. This thing is all a joke if it's operating at 3 transactions per second. It's a joke at 30 transactions per second, although less of a joke. You got to get up to really, really high speeds. And Visa is doing, on an average day, by their own posts, they're doing about 1,700 transactions per second. So if you are not there, then it's just, you're doing something different. Maybe what you're doing still has value and stuff, but you're not going to be able to compete with the big boys. So one of the biggest issues for me is how do we achieve scale without compromising decentralization? Is that even possible? And I thought it wasn't possible for a long time, but that was a few years ago until the Avalanche protocol came along. So that's number one for me. The other thing I see is flexibility. I see these one-size-fits-all solutions. I see people pushing one coin. Like this coin will be the next thing. I don't know why that coin will win over any other one. You can't really win at this game unless you're able to accommodate different people's needs. There is no single virtual machine that will be perfect for everybody. It just won't be, no matter what it is. Even if it's Turing complete, then the cost will be high, or something else will be wonky about it and you'll want to change it. So those two are pretty crucial as far as I'm concerned. And, and so those are the real two issues. The third one is one of community, I think, and that's a softer issue, which is I hope that the community knows how to find technical innovation and focuses on that as opposed to get-rich-quick schemes. And there's some of that going on in DeFi today. So those three, if you ask me, are the big issues in DeFi. I'm dying to find out what you think it is, because you have a very different perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think I view this kind of holistically, not even just DeFi. DeFi is kind of the tip of the spear right now. It's the use case that's being birthed into the world and managed into success now by a large group of smart people. And there's kind of a virtuous cycle of success breeds more smart people, breeds more applications, breeds more success in that vertical. I think the way that I look at it is scalability is important. I don't know if it's necessarily critical up to Visa speeds. I think it's critical up to the speeds the market needs.
Sure.
So if you have like 5 CryptoKitty games and 20 DeFi things and 5 DEXs, and you want enough scalability to comfortably accommodate that size of market transactions. The problem people have is they don't know what size that'll be. They don't know how quick that'll grow. And so that's a type of thing where if you're going to build out scalability assumptions, you want certain guarantees that like you won't be back in this state a year from now when the space grows, because there's these laws around like once you give people systems resources, they consume those system resources, right? So the approach that like we need to have a scalability to beat the entire global financial systems transactional volume. We want to double it or something. Yeah, okay, maybe that's a decent future-proofed approach. It definitely creates a very high technical burden that I only think a few people on the planet could realistically seek to meet successfully, or even groups of people. But I think the most immediate thing is, do you have something in production? Does it solve the scalability problems for the market's current demand for scalability, right? Like that's really the first question, right? The second question for me is then, what can you build in these environments? What can you generate as a contract? And that's about removing all kinds of hurdles. So do you have all kinds of libraries? Do you have oracles that provide external data, right? That allow you to generate these DeFi contracts very quickly and effectively. Like, for example, the big shift that we've seen that I'm very, very excited about is the fact that a team of 3 to 5 people can show up use a Chainlink Oracle network that provides a certain piece of data to 5 other users, and they can just use that to go live with a new financial product on chain today. Mm-hmm. And they don't even need to figure out how an Oracle works or build that infrastructure. They don't even need to say, hey, I need this data point on chain. The data point's already on chain, just like in web developer land, you have libraries and you have all these resources that just people show up and use, and they go through this hurdle. So I think the second thing is, how do people go through these hurdles, right? How do they go through the hurdles around integrating all the necessary inputs and outputs that a more robust, kind of more useful application or next generation application would need? Not to say that it won't use tokens, it'll still use tokens as collateral, and that's an important functionality, but it's kind of an evolution of our space. The third thing that I think is important is privacy. And I think there's going to be all kinds of interesting work on privacy, both on the layer 1 level and then also on the Oracle level. So then the third question is, how does privacy fit into all this, whether you get it at layer 1 or whether you get it at an Oracle somehow doing some computation that you want to remain private, and then putting on only certain portions of the computation on chain. And at a certain point, privacy, for certain user groups, privacy is going to be like the gating issue, right? And those user groups, I know from my own experience, have a lot of value, and they have a lot of interesting use cases to contribute to our industry. And so I don't think we're really there. I think we're at the point where, like, let's make the system work scalably enough to accommodate demand. Let's make it composable, and let's make sure that people can quickly build high quality, secure applications and iterate on them quickly. And then on top of that, there's going to be all kinds of other improvements, privacy guarantees, more scalability, more inputs, and that's when our space's dynamic for building is going to approach what you see in the web world. And once it approaches what you see in the web world, that's when you're going to see this unlocking of innovation, because then people can come in with the model of, like, move fast and break things, and they can just, like, build amazing things in a weekend or a week. And we've seen what comes out of that in the web world. What comes out of that is hyper competitive and hyper effective kind of solutions that large corporations, can't build. Right. They acquire them or something, right? So that's how you really see innovation.
Yeah. I want to drill down on that transition. So you mentioned the technical challenges that the DeFi space, and in general the blockchain space in general, faces. But then there is this secondary issue of, how do we take this technology and change the way the global finance system works? What are the key factors that enable that shift in your view?
I think for the global financial system, you're going to see polishing of this technology in the developed markets. You're going to see enough new kind of solutions around scalability and various other things that begin to approach, institutional grade kind of requirements. So that's going to be scalability, certain amounts of privacy, certain guarantees around security. And then what it's all really going to be driven by is demand. So I think if low interest rates or the solvency of traditional financial products comes into question, right? So if interest rates continue to be zero or in some cases negative in certain geographies, and the crypto world can properly basket together collateral to create interest rates that then consistently stay higher than what you find in the traditional world, then I think there will be huge demand to convert dollars into crypto assets, because you can now get a 4% interest rate rather than a 0% interest rate. And inflation is just going to accelerate this demand, right? I think there's going to be some fundamental economic factors that come into play, like needing yield and having to deal with solvency issues. Like, if people start becoming insolvent due to a global financial crisis, people are going to see how kind of the sausage is made, and they're going to realize that their counterparty risk is very high. Between those economic factors and the technology finally being in a place where it can meet global financial system, technical demands, I think you could very well see massive kind of very fast adoption. Based on those economic forces coming together with the technology finally meeting the requirements. And like, one of those requirements will be oracles for data, oracles for AML, KYCing of new users into the system. And so we kind of need to get to a place where, if institutions do want to build these products or want to use them, I actually think a lot of institutions are going to end up using DeFi protocols, because the DeFi protocols are going to be so well baked by that point that the financial institutions are just going to say, like, I need to get going. I don't have 6 months.
Yeah, exactly.
I got to use a protocol.
Exactly. That's really interesting. My take is a little different than yours, actually. I don't know. I would love it if the crypto space took over traditional finance, but I don't know that that will happen. And I don't think one should predicate one's financial future on that kind of a shift. What I do see happening over the last 10 years, undeniable trend, is crypto is its own asset class and it's growing. And if you look at the brightest, the best and the brightest, and I was in a very privileged position to see this firsthand as I got a very nice feed of students at Cornell University. I could see where they were going and I saw what they did with their projects. The many projects today are going the route where they raise funding via tokens. Many projects today are starting out crypto first. And when you start out like that, there's a growing community of projects that got their funding, that their assets are already in digital form. They started thinking about digital assets from the get-go. And that universe will expand and get bigger and bigger. And at some point, it'll be obvious. And there will be a generational shift as well. Like right now, if you go to Wall Street and talk to them, as we have done many times with Avalanche, people are interested, of course. And you can see that there are a whole bunch of great things that they will be able to tap into. But their starting point as regular people is, the internet was new to them. So crypto is, kind of a second new thing to them. And what we're slowly seeing, and I think this is already partly underway, is there's a new generation coming up for whom crypto is just as native to them. And of course, it should go without saying that if I want to buy an asset issued by somebody in Singapore, I should be able to do so. But today you can't. Or I want to buy Russian bonds. Why can't I buy Russian bonds? I have a very funny story, by the way, about trying to buy Russian bonds in upstate New York. It's just well nigh impossible. So anyway, I think this is an interesting space where I don't know that we need an overnight success or a killer app. We just have to do what we're doing and continue to innovate. And there are things coming where the things that the traditional finance people say to crypto people, they just will look absurd. So for a long time, they would say, oh, this is a Ponzi. Well, it's not a Ponzi. For a while, they would say your products are this, that, and the other. But by now, they would say you can't scale. Well, now we can scale with Avalanche. This thing is not flexible. It's a slow database and so forth. We've shown these to be not true. What I think is going to happen is the value proposition on the table is going to be so strong, just like you said, that if you're a mid-career asset manager, it'll be obvious to you that you want to simply just go down the crypto route because it's the fastest route that gives you most liquidity. So anyhow, it's an exciting future. I cannot wait.
Yeah, I agree. It's always funny to me when that stuff happens as well. I've been hearing it for years, and I already have a crop of people coming back and saying, and I see them now talking about blockchain. The people that were like, no, that's never going to work, and now they're doing presentations on it. So I've already seen that whole shift, and I think it's gonna...
Okay, I have a very funny story on this front. So when we created IC3 at Cornell, we went to the Cornell treasurer and said, hey, we're going to be holding a bunch of coins as part of IC3, this initiative for cryptocurrencies. Mm-hmm. And the treasurer looked at us and said, do you know how hard it is for us to keep track of euros? And now you want to put in Bitcoin into the mix? This is the accounting system. It'll take me 9 months to just modify the accounting system. And we said, okay, we went back, we found more creative ways of holding the Bitcoin in a manner that's compatible with the accounting and so forth. But 3 weeks later, he came to us and it was hilarious. And he's like, I need to hold Bitcoin. And we're like, what happened to you in the intervening 3 weeks? Well, it turns out that he got freaked out by ransomware. And he realized that if ransomware hits Cornell's machinery, that he's going to have Bitcoin on hand. And that was the very beginning of a large institution getting into Bitcoin in quite a terrible way, actually, it turns out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's what I was just thinking. I think that's one of the things that colors our space kind of poorly. Is that sometimes people come in through these channels, and I think it puts them off, and it might close the eyes of some smart people that would have otherwise been part of it, which is both their loss and the space's loss. But I unfortunately I don't know how to manage that properly. I think that, the next question then is how you think that DeFi projects are more likely to be successful, right? So in this environment you described, where it's kind of this slow rolling kind of, here we all are together, we all have private keys, we're all using this infrastructure. Even in that world where everything slowly grows and becomes, successful within its own ecosystem, right? And eventually reaches a kind of threshold of success and adoption. What do you think are the factors that will make DeFi projects more likely to be successful?
There's I think only one major one that's really a game changer or a deal breaker. And at least in my view, that's infrastructure. You gotta have fast, secure infrastructure or you're out of this game. And if you're repurposing a hobby product for use in, for prime time, then you're not gonna be able to go far. So if your DeFi project requires $50 per transaction, and doing anything requires like 24 transactions, as is often the case with these DeFi Lego blocks, then you're out of the game. Like the only person who can participate is somebody who has $1,200 to waste on transaction fees to do 24 transactions at $50 a pop. That's crazy talk, right? It's just not, these projects are not going to be able to go anywhere if the infrastructure is fundamentally limited in its capacity, and therefore is fundamentally expensive and out of the reach of most people in DeFi today. So that's, I think, number one. If there are any listeners out there thinking about launching DeFi products, pick your infrastructure carefully. Pick something that can handle your needs, whether those are security needs, whether those are scalability needs, and do it in a fashion that's future-proof. Because if you just do the obvious things, you might very well end up paying the obvious fees, which can be catastrophic. What about you? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, from my point of view, I think that the ability to securely and quickly build things in kind of the web world model, right? A part of that is having the scalable system that can meet your user requirements and meet your kind of architectural plans for how you want the application to work. A part of that is, how do you access external resources? A part of that is, if a blockchain can't necessarily do all the computation you need, where do you do that computation? Do you do that in some kind of Oracle network that can provide privacy, or some other stuff possibly around the data? So for me, I think the good thing is there are a number of smart people working on how you can solve the scalability issue, right? And that issue does need to get solved, because we're kind of at the limits of what people want to do, and it needs to be solved. And it's going to be solved, and it's getting worked on. So invariably in that dimension, the space is going to grow. I think once you have that, you want to create an environment where people can compose really, really advanced applications quickly without having to be security experts, and creating an infrastructure and creating a set of kind of input and output building blocks, which we do in the form of oracles, I think is how you achieve that. So I think you do need scalability so that people can efficiently build applications to meet user demand, which we're very lucky to see growing, right? So that's really the thing that's driving this, is real user demand. And the second thing is, once they have that scalability, their hurdle is going to be, well, how do I quickly build something if I'm not a security expert? And then their choices shouldn't be, hey, I need to become a security expert and build some more infrastructure in order to build something. Their choices should be, do I use Oracle A for input A, or Oracle B for input B? Like, how do I compose all of these things into a single system? And invariably, the model that they're all going to use is the model they have in Webland, where they basically look for libraries, or they look for kind of interfaces that they can connect together with their core code, which in this case will be on-chain Oracle contract that essentially represent all these other systems, and they'll connect them together, and they'll be able to build at the speed and at the quality that they're used to. And if we can create that type of environment together with scalability and add some additional privacy features, then I think our space can finally become next level mainstream, and all the developers across the world that are used to a certain kind of class of infrastructure can show up here and just jump right in using the exact same dynamics that they're used to.
Cool. So let's fast forward a year. Suppose a year from now, what is it? September 2021. Where do you think we're going to be? What are going to be the hot button issues? What's on everyone's minds? Has the space grown substantially? What has happened? Where do you see us going?
Right. So I want to say this with the caveat that I'm always unbelievably optimistic and positive about our space. I have a track record of for like 7 years saying this is the year. This is the year it's going to happen. Every single year with me, it's the year. So I think you're right that you shouldn't necessarily bank on that, and you should have plans that basically allow you to exist in the space long enough for whatever's going to happen here at its own speed. Where I think that we are at the end of September in the following year is that's the year, right? That's the year when basically DeFi has already blown up. You already have banks. I basically think what's going to happen is that banks and other people that own the relationship with users, Robinhood, various banks, the people that have the interface, they are going to want to give users access to all these smart contracts and
Absolutely.
DeFi protocols, the same way they want to give them access to cryptocurrency. It's going to be the same movie all over again.
Yeah.
And what's going to happen is they're going to be looking for how to do that. And their choices are going to be, hey, I'm going to build it over the course of a year with my developers who don't know how this works. Or I'm going to use an existing protocol and I'm going to pop it into my interface. So the point at which all of these DeFi protocols to generate interest, to make derivatives, to do all these other things, start getting popped into all these user experience centric apps like Robinhood and bank interfaces, that's the point at which things really go up and to the right. Because that's the point at which the path has been so polished now that everybody can just get funneled into DeFi protocols. And I'm with the caveat that I'm always very optimistic. I think we will start seeing that already happen by this time next year. We'll already start seeing other interfaces that aren't crypto originated kind of user owning interfaces say, I'm just going to take a DeFi protocol and I'm going to present it to a user and they're going to consume it.
Yep.
And the DeFi protocols at that point are going to go, straight through the roof because the types of numbers that these interfaces have accumulated over many years are very large.
Yeah, we're already seeing that. That's yeah. I'm fully with you. That's even though I think the growth that I'm banking on is slow and steady. You know how these things are, right? Slowly at first, all of a sudden, then all of a sudden, all at once. So let's see. On the technical side, I think there's going to be some really interesting changes. So the DeFi protocols that we're seeing, there is a whole lot of creative effort there. We're beginning to see the emergence of automated market makers. They're fantastic. DEXs, I would say, are less so. I haven't seen much innovation on the DEX side. Online order book side, I haven't seen all that much innovation. And I haven't seen anything yet that competes with Wall Street. And I know I will. So there's going to be stuff out there that essentially shows and says to Wall Street, look, you've got your infrastructure. All of it requires trust, all of it. And there are ways of doing this that are trustless and much more trustworthy as a result. You don't have to trust any intermediary. The potential for malfeasance, the potential for anything going wrong is limited. So I'm really excited about that. I'm really excited about other innovative products. NFTs they have been stupid playing cards up until now. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's its own market. But we will begin to see NFTs emerge as a different asset class that are tied to other things besides pretty pictures on a screen. As long as they're pretty pictures on a screen, fine, that's its own use case. But they could represent bigger, better assets. And we haven't seen that area explored, and I'm sure that in about a year we will. Going forward, we're going to see other kinds of assets that are complex, assets that have all kinds of covenants, riders, etc., being traded across the globe. And we haven't seen that. And I think the simplest way to really sort of view what's going on is by analogy. If I look at what's happened over the last, I would say, 20 years, we saw people who understand computer technology apply it to different domains. and you can pick a domain that, that seems tiny, taxi cab hailing. And that gave rise to at least 2 unicorns. And pick anything, booking a hotel. There's a unicorn right there. So you can take anything, no matter how small, and you apply the magic wand of computer technology and distributed systems to it, bang, out comes a unicorn. And that is going to happen with financial infrastructure. We're going to see unicorns come out of the crypto space and be accepted in mainstream finance. So that's what I'm really, really excited about. And maybe on that note, given the time situation, we should wrap up. How shall we go from here? What are the sort of the checkout this and that kind of directions you might give to the audience, so that if anybody wants to follow up on what you said on the Chainlink side, they can do so?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, chain.link is a good resource. Our Twitter is relatively updated with new integrations, new networks going live, new innovations that we're putting out, like the fair sequencing service to help eliminate front running, these types of things. I think they'll also be seeing that we're putting oracles on Avalanche, and that those oracles will be available for people to compose various DeFi products very efficiently. That's something that we are working on. It is going to be happening. Our goal is really to enable people to build these contracts on the environment where they want to build those contracts, and to kind of collectively take our space and evolve it into this next level of these more advanced financial products that can be plugged into the global financial system, can be used by people in emerging markets from, a feature phone, because their telecom provider now can access that financial product and it meets their requirements, right? And so these are kind of the cool next level things that we hope to enable by providing oracles to Avalanche and making all of these things possible.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sergey. On the Avalanche side, if anybody is interested on the latest, coolest technology in blockchains, you can go to avalabs.org. Check out our platform. We went mainnet only a week ago, and I'm really proud of the system that we put out. It's a lot of fun. It's got really interesting features, and there will be a host of projects coming online. As Sergey mentioned, Chainlink's oracles, which we were very excited about. And there is a lot of other technologies to come that take advantage of Avalanche's speed, scalability, and most importantly, its flexibility, its ability to run multiple virtual machines. So on that note, Sergey, always great to chat with you. Thank you so much for coming by.
Always my pleasure. Thank you for having me at the conference. Congratulations again on the mainnet launch. That's a great milestone, and shows you guys are really building and delivering, which is great. It's my pleasure to chat with you always. Thank you very much.
Take care, Sergey.
Thank you.